In the 1950s, some Russian chemists went looking for a chemical reaction that would oscillate, like a chemical analog of a pendulum.
So could you get something going back and forth, say, between blue and orange over and over again? And naively, you might say that's impossible because there's principles of thermodynamics which say that closed systems just increase their entropy over time, that they're just going to come to equilibrium. But there's no principle in chemistry or thermodynamics that says you have to go monotonically to equilibrium. You are allowed to oscillate and damp out to equilibrium in an oscillatory way.
This is exactly what Boris Belousov and later Anatol Zhabotinsky discovered, so this reaction is known as the Belousov-Zhabotinsky or BZ reaction. I've sped it up because it can continue for half an hour or more, oscillating between these colors. Now it spends more time on the burnt orange color, so I've sped up those sections more.
It's very spectacular, and it's kind of shocking to see a chemical reaction doing these periodic changes in color, like chemicals acting like a clock, like a pendulum. So the stirred reaction has the advantage that you really get a sense of the collectivity of quadrillions of molecules, Avogadro's number of molecules, all doing the same thing at the same time. On the other hand, if you don't stir, if you just put like a petri dish of the BZ reaction, you can see something even more amazing, I think, which is that you can see spiral waves of color or target patterns, expanding circles of color moving through the liquid. Maybe I should emphasize, the liquid itself is not moving. It's not like we're seeing ripples on a pond. But what's not still is chemical concentrations. You can see these blue waves in the BZ reaction that are chemical waves, not water waves, and they will just propagate, and they move at a constant speed, or they can look like a spiral that just grows and grows and spins around. And what's really spooky and uncanny about this is that the same phenomenon is seen in the heart. You can see spiral waves of electrical excitation in a heart that look exactly like the spiral waves in chemical oscillations and chemical waves in the BZ reaction. And this was the sort of thing that inspired my mentor, a guy named Art Winfrey, who used chemical reaction waves to give himself insight into cardiac arrhythmias. You know, you may have heard the most deadly kind of arrhythmia, the kind that will kill you really in a matter of minutes, ventricular arrhythmias, ventricular fibrillation in particular. Winfrey's work, seeing these rotating spirals on hearts, as well as in chemistry, led him to a theory about what's really causing ventricular fibrillation. And how could we design, for example, better defibrillators that are gentler? That could be a good outcome of this theory. You know, the lack of synchronization in a fibrillating heart is what causes no blood to be pumped, and then sudden death ensues.
So too little synchronization is obviously a problem, but too much synchronization can also cause trouble. Remember the wobbly Millennium Bridge?
It was all apparently down to something called crowd synchrony.
Was it the people walking in step that caused it to oscillate? Actually, kind of the opposite. The Millennium Bridge was designed to look like a ribbon of light, so its construction is unique. Unlike a typical suspension bridge, its supporting cables run alongside it, stretched taut like guitar strings.
In the civil engineering literature, all designers know that you do not build a footbridge with a resonant frequency equal to the frequency of human walking. So we take about 2 strides per second, one with your left foot, one with your right foot. So everybody who takes civil engineering knows if people are going to walk on the bridge, it better not have a resonant frequency in the vertical direction of 2 hertz. Okay, everybody knows that, including the people who built the Millennium Bridge. But what they didn't know, and what was new that day, is that half the frequency is also important. A frequency of 1 cycle a second, which is the frequency with which you put down, say, your left foot. Half the time you're doing your left foot. So why does that matter? Because when you're walking across a bridge and you put your left foot down, you put a tiny force sideways on the bridge. And normally that wouldn't matter because people are all walking at their own pace, they're not synchronized. So their sideways forces, which are only about 1/10 as big as their downward forces that they impart on the bridge, that would be negligible and it wouldn't do anything to the bridge. But if the bridge happens to have a sideways frequency of 1 cycle a second, which the Millennium Bridge, it happened, did, then people can actually start to get the bridge moving a little bit.
After the bridge was closed, engineers got their colleagues to walk across it in increasing numbers while they measured its acceleration. With 50 people on the bridge, there was very little motion. At 100, the vibrations had barely increased. At 156, there was still no wobble. But with just 10 more people, 166, the acceleration grew dramatically. The bridge swayed just like it had on opening day. The system had undergone a phase transition.
If people can get the bridge moving a little, it turns out people don't like to walk on a platform that's moving a little bit sideways. If you've ever been in a train that's kind of going fast, or if you stand up in a rowboat and it starts moving sideways, people spread their legs apart to try to stabilize themselves, and they will actually start to walk in step with the sideways motion of the bridge. You can see footage from the BBC of people doing that. It's spectacular and crazy.
So it wasn't people walking in sync that got the bridge to wobble, it was the wobbling bridge that got people to walk in sync.
And so as the people got in step with the motion of the bridge, by adopting this weird kind of penguin gait, they ended up inadvertently pumping more energy into the bridge and making its motion worse. And so this was this positive feedback loop between the motion of the crowd causing the bridge to move more, which caused more people to get in step with the bridge, which made more people, drive the bridge.
Once the problem was identified, they could solve it by decreasing the coupling strength. They installed energy-dissipating dampers all along the bridge.
It was a tremendous embarrassment, and it cost several million pounds to repair the bridge. In science, we do reductionism. All of our science courses tell us the way to solve a problem is to break it into smaller parts and analyze the parts. And that has been phenomenally successful for every branch of science. But the great frontier in science today is what happens when you try to go back to put the parts together to understand the whole. That's the field of complex systems. That's why we don't understand the immune system very well. We don't understand consciousness very well, or the economy.
It seems like the whole is more than the sum of the parts.
That's the cliche that has entranced me for my whole research career. I want to understand, how can you figure out the properties of the whole given the properties of the parts?